Gibson certainly played Dr. Frankenstein on this one. Welcome back, troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Oh man, what is in this box is gonna scare the pants off of ya. And it ties off of an episode that we did a couple of weeks ago. I got this from Heritage Auctions. So in that video, there was one guitar I wanted most out of all of them. And there was pretty much only two people that wanted it, me and some other ghoul. So even before the auction day, we were going back and forth trying to one-up each other until eventually he decided to call it quits, and he waited until the actual auction day. So I was there waiting, and the auctioneer was happily taking our bids back and forth as we fought to have custody of this amalgamation of models. But it was perhaps an error on the auctioneer's part that actually allowed me to win this guitar. Unfortunately, I was not recording the footage because typically this auction house records them and puts them on their YouTube page. But they forgot to start the YouTube live stream, so it was not documented. But essentially what happened is the auctioneer made the guy in the room think he was the winning bidder, so he stopped bidding. But unbeknownst to him, it was my online bid. So I was rather shocked when the bidding on this one stopped. I was a little bit worried if I would actually get it, but no, it's here now, which I'm pretty happy about, even if it was just a stroke of luck. But I knew this thing had to be documented, so having a weird story behind how I got it definitely made it a bit more interesting for a collection piece. Inside here sleeps a Les Paul like you've never seen before. This thing is an absolute monstrosity. So yeah, it looks a little bit doofy from the front. I mean, what's going on with our pickups? They're like incredibly spaced. But look right here, we've got a fancy little swoopity swoop on the end of our fretboard. That's pretty fascinating. But hey, what is this? We have Super 400 inlays. But wait till you see the giant headstock on this thing. I mean, what Les Paul have you ever seen that looks like this? And on top of a giant headstock, we've got the flip-out winding tuners, which you don't normally see in the era that this one was created in. But my friends, the auction never showed anything of the side. This has like Gretsch-like binding to it, with the golden drum shell, not only on the body, but also on the neck. Not gonna lie, I was absolutely terrified when I first took this thing out of the case because I felt a line right here where this binding ends. So I thought that was a crack running up the neck, which I was very scared of. But on top of all this, look at what's on the backside of our headstock. It's a Stinger with an additional inlay on the back. Oh, it's pretty easy to see. This is one fancy boy that's also kind of an ugly boy at the same time, but I like it because there might be a little bit more to the story of this one. So this right here is Carlos Santana's signature. So Gibson might have made this for him, trying to win him over to come back to Gibson guitars, or it could have just been a gift in general. They wanted to give him something unique because what this is a blending of a super high-end arch top called the Super 400. That's where this inlay style first originated. You can see very similar attributes to them. Giant headstock, super multi-ply, binding around the fretboard. You've got your curly Q at the end of the board, but most importantly, they're 25.5-inch scale length instruments. Now normally a Les Paul is 24 3/4. But just looking at the spacing of our pickups here, we can tell something has also been modified on this. But if you need one more additional special feature to this one, it has a heel cap just like those. So hopefully somebody that knows Carlos will send this video to him and then maybe he can fill us in, because this is one of those weird guitars where I don't care how many instruments you've seen in your life, you would never forget it. But what's additionally fascinating is the fact that this has a custom shop edition decal. And our serial number puts this to being produced in 1992. So a little bit of Gibson history here. The custom shop as we think of it today as a completely separate division did not open until late 1993. So this is technically a pre-custom shop custom guitar, which is always super cool in my eyes. But the fact that it says custom shop edition means there might be more than one of these things, or at least there was plans for more than one, because usually custom shop original signifies a complete one-off. So what do we call this thing? It's a Les Paul Custom and a Super 400, so how about we call it the Les Paul Super Custom 400? Well, that'd be alright, but the Super Custom is a different model that was first birthed in the year 1979. Neil Schon of Journey is very famous for using one of those, so that might get a little bit confusing. We could call it the Les Paul Custom Super 400, but no, that actually belongs to a different model from 1991. Regular Les Paul Custom that has Super 400 inlays. Until we know why Carlos Santana signed this guitar, I don't necessarily want to attach his name to it because he might not have anything to do with it. It might just be that some dude took this backstage and said, "Carlos, do you want to sign it?" So at this point in time, I think our best option is to call this the 1992 Gibson Les Paul Super 400 Custom. But for now, I'm just going to call myself lucky that I was able to grab this because it's even more special in person. But do we have any case candy? Yes, but unfortunately nothing that further identifies this. Just our usual little hang tags and owner's manuals. All right, let's go ahead and throw it on the workbench, get it cleaned up because it's pretty crusty, and then take a sound sample. My friends, the plot thickens. Imagine my surprise. I go to take the neck pickup out because you never know what you're going to find, and BAM! Prototype score! That's why you've got to stay curious, my friends. So this is now an official prototype, most likely for Carlos Santana. Kind of like what I was saying, they were probably trying to win him over with a signature guitar, but as we all know, he is a heavy PRS player. Doesn't necessarily make sense why he would sign it unless he actually accepted it as a gift and later gave it away. This pickup cavity shot also tells us something else very important. Do you see what that is right here? There's two areas where we can see the base coat. It is a gold finish. So that indeed confirms that this color is candy apple red with a gold base coat. There's two different ways to do candy apple red. You can do gold and you can do a silver base coat. Now Gibson Les Pauls with the gold base coat are notorious for orange peel. Something about the gold and the red doesn't mix. So when they first introduced this finish in the early to mid 80s, the very early ones has a crazily orange peeled finish. And this one's not as bad as that one that I owned at one point in time, but the auction house did disclose that they thought maybe there was some overspray on the top or something, and this is probably why. However, I looked at this under blacklight. I don't think there had been any overspray unless it was very, very, very early on in this guitar's life. This is just how candy apple red with a gold base coat ages. And I was very careful when polishing around this area. I don't think that's under any type of a clear coat. You can definitely feel the marker. However, it's very strong. It's not easy to get off. So I don't think we have to worry about that wearing away. Bridge pickup cavity doesn't really have anything too interesting for us to take a look at though. But here we can see the maple top joining onto our mahogany body, so it's regular in that aspect. Here's where things get really interesting, our pickup set. Just a regular 57 Classic, so why am I making a big deal about it? 1992 is the year that they prototyped the 57 Classic. It's very likely these are some of the earliest 57 Classics that were produced. In fact, maybe that's why they gave this to him, to see, hey, do you like these new pickups that we're doing? It might even be possible that these aren't 57 Classics. They could just be special Santana pickups. And within the circuit, it's 7.83 in the bridge, a little bit hotter, 8.14 in the neck, and just for fun, 4 in the middle. Next up, let's talk about our bridge. It's a true ABR1. You've just got a post in the body, not a stud. And that ABR1 looks like this, with a full weight tailpiece that polished up nicely. If you looked closely around the tailpiece posts, you can see the finish that was sitting on top of the stud within the body. The finish has come off the top of that, which is pretty common, but it's still there, so if you screw it down tight, you just see the finish over top. Same thing is true over here. The reason why having an ABR1 at this time period is kind of cool because they were only using that on really high-end guitars. The Les Paul Classic had it, as well as the Les Paul reissues. Can we say this thing is built to historic specs? What do you guys think? Is this a long neck tenon? Like, we don't see it ending in here, but it's also a lot further into the body than it normally is. So I would call that a long neck tenon. Seems like we have the regular 2 volumes, 2 tones. Unfortunately, these knobs don't stay on. Just enough that they don't completely fall off. They're the 57 reissue custom style knobs. And there was no pickguard on this, stock from the factory. Probably because they couldn't figure out how to make it fit with this body. It had to be custom and it would start hitting things. So it'd have to be like a short guard and that probably just wouldn't have looked good. Check out the side. It had some weird goo on it, but thankfully that cleaned off. That was totally unexpected. You would find this on some art guitars. It was the Penthouse models. It's the one that has the showgirls on it. And they would be all white and then they would have this gaudy gold binding. But it kind of works with the whole candy apple red with the gold undercoat. And on top of that, you've got an additional layer of binding right here. It's about 2.06 inches thick, so about the same as a regular Les Paul, maybe just a tad bit thicker. Now let's move on from our body to our neck. So I was keen enough to notice that, okay, we've got our fancy curly Q down here. In case you don't see it, that is the inverse of the Gibson headstock. So if you look at just the red part, you see the Gibson headstock. But do you guys see what is also different here besides just our fancy layers of binding and purfling around the edges and super 400 inlays made of real mother of pearl? If you answered the frets have been shined up into perfection, you are not wrong, but this Les Paul only has 20 frets. Count it, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Just like a Super 400, I guess. But once you realize that, then this makes complete sense. Because when I first saw this, I thought, baritone Les Paul, yes! Because there's an Epiphone baritone model that almost looks exactly like this, and I always thought they were really doofy looking. But the reason why this one looks doofy with our spacing is we don't have the additional frets here, and this making it look weird. So normally our neck pickup would be here-ish. Just to verify that I'm not making things up, I had to look at this side by side with a regular Les Paul. If you didn't think it looked freaky before, now it definitely does. So the body's still 17 inches long, which is about the same as over here. But I was correct, the neck does come down a little bit further. It's about 4 inches into the guitar if you count your little point. Whereas over here it's only about 3. It's just your usual 9 and 13 inch for your bouts. But your space in between the pickups, about 3.2 inches, and a regular Les Paul, 2 1/4. Something else you're going to notice, look at your bridge and tailpiece, how far back it is on the body as compared to here. This knob right here lines up with your tailpiece, but on this guitar, that knob lines up with your bridge, so they had to sink that back further to accommodate our scale length. So hopefully that clears some things up and helps you understand exactly what's going on here. Check out all that binding. Still have the fret nibs too. And if that's not enough, there's another multiply binding down here, even on top of your gold area. That would have been pretty costly had they need to have made a bunch of these. So with all that in mind, that's how it only measures 25.5 inches. Which is still cool though, because there's not many 25.5 inch scale Les Pauls. Obviously, not everyone can own this guitar, so if you really have to have the Fender scale on a Les Paul, check out one of the Les Paul long scales. Besides the scale length, they're also double bound, top and back of the body. And ooh, more fun specs. 12-inch fretboard radius is not correct. Looks like they wanted a slightly more round one at 10 inches. Very fascinating. I'm surprised they didn't go for like a brass nut on this thing. But whoa, that's a 1.72 inch nut, so a little bit wider than normal. And we'll take it at the 10th since that's kind of like the 12th, how the neck joins to the body, but 2.04. First fret neck depth 0.83 and kind of chunks up 0.96 by the 10th. By no means huge, but it's got some roundedness to it. The binding makes it look bigger than it really is. And now it's time for our massive headstock. Of course, we get the 90s era Gibson logo. The kind of blocky one that still looks vintage, and our mother of pearl custom emblem. And if you were to look at it right here, it would be kind of familiar to a custom, because normally the truss rod cover kind of screws in like right at the end of that. But this just has like a whole nother half of a headstock here. It's not as weird to hold it as I thought it would be though. I think it's because the neck sinks further into the body, so it kind of balances itself out. Truss rod cover appears to be brass. It's a little bit pitted, but it's shined up pretty nice. Unfortunately, no additional markings on it. Truss rod, it's got life left. Got a couple of threads sticking out, but look at that. It is a maple neck, so that makes it different from most Les Pauls. Now, I don't see any additional pieces, doesn't mean that they're not there, but it is at least a maple neck, if not a multi-pieced one. And yes, we've got the flip-out winding tuner tips on our seal-fast tuners, which unfortunately, now I realize why people replace them. They are garbage. Some of these hardly move at all with strings on them. So if I were to gig this guitar, yeah, I'd probably have to replace them. As long as they don't break when I'm restringing it, I'll just leave them as is. Moving on over to the backside. It's a lot of the same stuff we were already talking about. It's got the whole orange peeled finish effect. The pot state to 1992. You've got your regular ceramic disc capacitors as are common in this era. And those definitely look like these stock pickups to me. Now here's what's interesting though. Looking at our serial number further, this is very early 1992. I'm not exactly sure when in the year the 57 Classic was first produced, but that's even more proof that this is a very early set of something that looks like a 57 Classic. However, those readings did seem a little bit different. One other thing to note, usually your ground wire light comes in from over here. On this particular one, it needs to come in through right there. We've got our golden output jack plate, one strap button down here, the other in our usual position. There's our multi-bound heel cap.
And now we can continue up the backside of our neck. Now there's a lot of finish checking on this guitar, but metallic finishes and nitro, that's just usually how it goes. Something about these archtop guitars, I think they do their stingers differently because they always get a lot of finish checking around it. We saw that in that Gibson Legrand episode as well. We've got the outline of the nut and all the usual stuff. Honestly, I don't really like this golden binding on the neck, mainly just because this little lip where the neck begins and the binding starts that occurs over time in a more uncomfortable position, whereas it's usually a little further up the neck. But there's our beautiful custom shop edition decal. So did they have other prototypes out there? Maybe. Or it's possible this was the only one. But it was intended to be a series. But there we go, 90532-736. And there's those giant Kluson tuners, seal fasts as they're called, and our cool extra mother of pearl logo. I've always been a big fan of this, so I'm glad to have it on a Les Paul guitar now. Now let's view it under blacklight together. It's got a nice even ghastly green glow, so everything's looking okay on the back. But once you get to the neck, you can tell the story of this one. It was definitely a display piece for somebody. They had it in a stand. Unfortunately, you get a little bit of a nitro burn, but that also explains all the dust that was caked on here. Now don't get scared about this. It's not a headstock repair. That's just the finish checking I was talking about. And this is a different color finish than that, so it's going to look a little bit different. But nothing looks out of the ordinary here. But what is kind of strange is they must have used two different kinds of stands, because this one has a stand rash right there, and on the other side of the neck, as you would normally have one that hangs from there. So typically you wouldn't have it also contacting here, but over here you can see the stand mark of like an A-frame stand, so that's what that other one would have been from. Maybe even a third stand. You just couldn't figure out which one he wanted to use. Got stand marks all along the edge. But again, thankfully, you don't really see them too much in regular lighting situations. So now if we look at it closer, maybe this is what they were talking about, possible overspray. So maybe there is something over that, I'm not sure. Because there is a small area right here that kind of looks strange, so maybe there was a touch-up pretty early on in the guitar's life. I also saw another one right here, but it doesn't blacklight the same. And honestly, this area only looks dark like that in camera.
However, my editor took this a step further, adjusted the contrast, and saw the reason why the finish looks different there is somebody had professionally buffed something off of the guitar. It looks like some sort of a personalization. It looks like it says something along the lines of, "To the guitar's #1 fan." So perhaps Carlos auctioned this off for charity or gave it away to somebody who really loved this thing. But honestly, having that written upside down in a displaying standpoint, I can understand why somebody removed the personalization, because usually signed guitars, they aren't worth a huge premium. Signatures that don't have a personalization specific to a certain name do tend to sell higher. So there you go, someone was trying to play a fast one, but we saw it.
Our inlays are glowing, that's just always cool. Our headstocks are looking good. But oh wow, the auction house was not lying. They said it was 10.5 pounds. I measured 10 pounds, 12.2 ounces, so closer to 11. I'm honestly surprised they didn't go for more so the Florentine style on this, or I wonder if this guitar inspired the Florentine Bantam series. But you have to remember, the Bantam series didn't start until 1995, so this is easily 3 years before that. I actually have a Les Paul built in that configuration, so I've got like two jazzy Les Pauls now, which is just great. L5 West Montgomery, as well as the Super 400 now. Now, had that had happened before they tried to woo over Carlos, if that's indeed what this model was, maybe they would have been more successful, because let's face it, 11 pounds on stage, not that comfy. But let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this interesting spacing sounds. first impressions, I gotta say, wasn't quite sure with this pickup spacing if I'd enjoy it, but these are great. The neck is nice and full. But not really muddy. The bridge has a nice hollowness to it. And of course your middle position. Starting to think these might just be custom pickups for this particular guitar. It's got a really nice raunchiness. It's almost a out of phase like tone, but on the neck. So now that we know everything I can teach you about this interesting beast at this point in time, what are my final thoughts on this? I specifically bought this guitar just because it was kind of weird and it matched my Les Paul in a Les Paul format of the high-end archtop guitars, because that's why I like collecting weird Les Pauls. I wasn't expecting to love it. Like, wow, these pickups in here sound phenomenal. They're a little bit different from other things that I've experienced in the past. They have some really good tonal opportunities to it, especially when you're trying to do some Santana stuff. So yes, many times you lose at the auction house, but there are a few rare instances where you make a great score, and this is one of those. I will be happily adding this one to my museum collection. Now, do I think we should take this into production and make it a real thing today? Here's what I would change. The whole Super 400 thing's cool, right? But let's back the neck back out, because you just don't really feel like soloing on this guitar, because by the time you hit the 12th fret, you're almost at the body on this particular guitar. So it really does change the way that you feel about playing, but I've never played a Super 400 before, so maybe if you're more so used to that, you would probably like that spec. The big giant headstock, I honestly did not mind it at all. I thought it was going to be a bit of an eyesore. The only thing this thing really needs is a new set of tuners. The tuner mechanisms inside, they're not turning properly. Some of them, like this, when you detune it, I mean, look at all this playroom. It's not actually moving the gear when I'm doing this. But apparently that's just the fate of the old Sealfasts. I knew that about the waffle back tuners, but since they were made by the same company, I'm not that surprised. They might be the two coolest tuners ever made, but they do not stand the test of time, unfortunately. I thought the gold binding was a little bit way too gaudy. It's not that nice, but now that it's all been shined up and it sparkles, It is honestly really elegant feeling. I enjoy it. It's a little bit flashy and out there. Your audience doesn't get to see it. I'm kind of surprised they didn't put it on the top. But this is what you get to see while you play it. It's just so beautiful. It reminds me of like emperor's clothing because it's very elegant. So who knows, depending on how much more of a story we find on this one day, we might have to re-review it. But until that day, I hope you enjoyed checking out this guitar. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will catch you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.
If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day. And you might even enjoy this next one.